At my son's wedding, the bride looked straight at me and told security, "Remove him before he ruins everything." In front of nearly 200 guests, my own son stood silent while two guards walked toward me. But the bride had made one mistake. She didn't know the entire wedding venue belonged to me. My name is Raymond Whitaker. I'm 58 years old, and I live in Charleston, South Carolina. For most of my life, I believed a man should not have to announce every sacrifice he makes for his family. I believed love was quieter than that. You paid the bills when no one saw. You stayed up late when your child was sick. You worked through grief because someone smaller than you still needed breakfast in the morning. That was how I raised my son, Ethan. His mother, Laura, died when he was 13. One day she was laughing in our kitchen, telling Ethan not to leave his baseball cleats by the back door, and 6 months later I was standing beside her hospital bed, holding her hand while Ethan cried into my coat. After that, it was just the two of us. I never remarried, not because I thought I was some kind of hero, but because every time I came home, I still expected to hear Laura's voice from the hallway. Ethan became my reason to keep moving. I built my business during those years, little by little, while trying not to let my son feel the weight of what we had lost. That business became Whitaker Harbor Events, a waterfront venue overlooking Charleston Harbor. People came there for weddings, charity dinners, anniversary parties, and retirement celebrations. They saw the white columns, the polished oak floors, the glass wall facing the water, and the garden lights glowing at sunset. What they didn't see were the years I spent repairing broken plumbing myself, negotiating bank loans, sleeping 3 hours a night, and wondering if I was going to lose everything. By the time Ethan was grown, the venue was successful, but I never raised him to worship money. I raised him to respect people, keep his word, and never look down on anyone doing honest work. For a long time, I thought those lessons stayed with him. Then he met Brianna Cole. At first, I tried to like her. She was polished, confident, and pretty in the way people notice right away. She worked in marketing, dressed like every room was a meeting, and spoke with the sharp smile of someone who had already decided what everyone was worth. The first time Ethan brought her to dinner, she looked around my house and said, "This is charming. Very old Charleston." It sounded polite, but her eyes said something else. Ethan laughed too quickly and changed the subject. That was the first sign I ignored. Over the next year, I watched my son become smaller around her. He stopped dropping by without calling. He stopped asking me for advice. When I offered help, he acted embarrassed, as if accepting anything from his father made him less of a man. Still, I stayed quiet. A father learns when to speak and when to wait. When Ethan called to tell me he was engaged, I sat at my kitchen table for a long moment after we hung up. I wanted to feel only happiness. Part of me did. My boy was starting his life, but another part of me felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear exactly, more like warning. 3 months before the wedding, Ethan came to my office at the venue. He looked tired, with shadows under his eyes and his tie loosened like he had been wearing someone else's life all day. "Dad," he said, "Brianna wants to use Whitaker Harbor." I looked at him carefully. "Does she know?" He shook his head. "She knows the venue is managed by Harborline Group. She doesn't know you own the LLC behind it." That was true. Years earlier, my attorney, Dana Fields, had helped me structure the business under a holding company for tax and liability reasons. My name was not on the public-facing brochures or contracts. Most clients knew Caleb Morris, my general manager, not me. "Why not tell her?" I asked. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Because she'll make it weird." I leaned back in my chair. "Make what weird?" He looked toward the window, where the harbor water moved under a gray afternoon sky. "She already thinks you're too involved." That one landed quietly, but it landed. "I see," I said. He turned back to me fast. "I don't mean it like that. She's just stressed. Her parents are involved. The wedding is becoming bigger than we planned." "And what do you need from me?" He swallowed. "Could you just let it go through normal management? Don't tell her you own it. Don't make a big thing out of it." I should have said no. I should have told my son that starting a marriage with secrets was a bad foundation, but I saw the exhaustion on his face. I saw the boy who had once fallen asleep against my shoulder after his mother's funeral. So I nodded. "For you," I said. "I'll keep quiet." He looked relieved but not happy. That was another sign I ignored. I had no idea that silence would become the weapon they used against me. When Ethan left my office that afternoon, I stood by the window for a long time, watching a couple walk along the marina. They were laughing about something, completely unaware that life can change because of one small decision. I kept asking myself whether agreeing to stay quiet had been the right choice. A father's instinct tells him to protect his child, even when that child is old enough to make his own mistakes. I convinced myself that Ethan was simply overwhelmed by wedding planning, and that things would settle down after the ceremony. For the next several weeks, I rarely heard from him. That wasn't normal. Before Brianna came into his life, Ethan and I had breakfast together almost every Saturday. Sometimes we talked business. Sometimes we talked baseball. Other times we just sat in comfortable silence. Those mornings meant more to me than I ever admitted. Now our conversations became short text messages. Busy today. Wedding meeting. Talk later, Dad. The distance didn't happen all at once. It happened one missed call at a time. I first noticed the real change during an engagement dinner at Victor and Marcia Cole's home. Their house overlooked a golf course in one of Charleston's newest neighborhoods. Everything inside looked expensive, but nothing felt lived in. The furniture looked untouched. Family photographs were carefully arranged, almost like decorations instead of memories. Victor greeted me with a firm handshake that felt more like a business meeting than a family gathering. "Raymond," he said, "glad you could make it." Marcia smiled politely, but there wasn't much warmth behind it. Brianna barely looked up from arranging flowers on the dining table. "I'm trying to make everything perfect," she said. "The wedding has to reflect who Ethan and I are." I smiled. "I'm sure it will." Then she looked at me. "We're going for something elegant, clean, sophisticated." I wasn't sure why she emphasized those words, but I had a feeling they weren't about the decorations. Dinner started pleasantly enough. We talked about Charleston, the weather, and wedding vendors. Whenever I spoke directly to Ethan, Brianna answered for him. "What kind of music are you thinking?" I asked my son. We decided on a live jazz band," Brianna interrupted. Later, I asked Ethan whether they planned to take a honeymoon immediately. "We're going to Napa first," Brianna answered again. "I've already handled everything." Each interruption was small. Each one chipped away at something. Ethan didn't seem to notice anymore. Halfway through dinner, Marcia smiled at me across the table. "So, Raymond," she said, "are you retired these days?" I shook my head. "No, I still run my business." "Oh." She looked genuinely surprised. "I thought you mostly supervised." "I own the company." Before I could explain further, Brianna laughed softly. "I'm sure it keeps you busy enough." There was something dismissive about the way she said it. Victor changed the subject before I answered. Looking back now, I think he already knew exactly who I was. On the drive home, I replayed the evening in my head. None of it had been openly rude. None of it was dramatic. It was something worse. I had been treated like a distant relative instead of Ethan's father. A week later, Ethan came by my house after work. He looked exhausted. "You okay?" I asked. He forced a smile. "Just wedding stuff." I handed him a cup of coffee. He sat at the kitchen table where he had done homework as a teenager. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal again. Then he cleared his throat. "Dad." "Yeah?" "Brianna thinks maybe you should let us make our own decisions." I looked at him carefully. "I already do." "I know." He stared into his coffee. "She just thinks sometimes you influence me." I couldn't help smiling. "Ethan, I haven't even offered an opinion." "I know." He looked embarrassed. "But she says people listen to you. She wants us to stand on our own." There it was. Not my words, not Ethan's either. Someone else's. I nodded slowly. "If that's what you both want, I'll respect it." His shoulders relaxed immediately. "Thanks, Dad." He had no idea that thanking me hurt more than arguing would have. A father shouldn't need permission to be part of his son's life. Over the following month, Brianna became even more involved in every wedding decision. Flowers, guest list, music, photography, menus. Everything went through her. Whenever vendors needed approval, she insisted all communication go through her instead of Ethan. Caleb Morris, my general manager, mentioned it casually one afternoon while reviewing upcoming events. The bride likes to be in complete control, he said. I smiled. That's common enough. He hesitated. Maybe. Then he looked at me. But she's been asking unusual questions. What kind of questions? Mostly about ownership. I frowned. What do you mean? She asked why Harborline Group handled the contracts instead of Whitaker Harbor directly. She also wanted to know whether the property had outside investors. I stayed quiet. Caleb continued. I told her that's confidential business information. Good. She didn't seem happy. Neither was I. For the first time since Ethan announced his engagement, I felt something deeper than concern. I felt that someone wasn't just planning a wedding. Someone was quietly trying to understand exactly who held the power behind it. A few days after my conversation with Caleb, the official wedding planning moved into its busiest stage. Because Whitaker Harbor Events hosted weddings almost every weekend, I made it a rule years ago not to interfere with clients unless they specifically asked for me. Caleb handled the day-to-day operations exceptionally well, and our staff trusted him completely. That distance also helped me honor the promise I had made Ethan. As far as Brianna was concerned, I was simply the groom's father, not the owner of the venue she had chosen. Even so, I quietly instructed Caleb to make sure Ethan received every discount I normally reserved for close family. Don't put my name on anything, I told him. Just apply the family rate through Harborline. Caleb looked at me for a moment. You know she'll never appreciate it. I'm not doing it for her. He nodded. I know. By the time the final invoice was prepared, nearly a third of the total cost had been waived. Premium floral setup, upgraded lighting, the waterfront cocktail patio, and the extended reception hours were all included at no additional charge. Ethan never asked for any of it. I simply wanted my son to begin married life without unnecessary debt. A week later, Caleb stopped by my office carrying a folder. You should probably see this. Inside were printed copies of emails between Brianna and the venue coordinator. One message caught my attention immediately. Please make sure my fiancé's father understands that he is attending as a guest only. I don't want him interfering with decisions or acting like this event belongs to him. I smiled sadly. If only she knew. There were several more messages. She requested that my access to the bridal suite hallway be restricted. She insisted that only members of the immediate wedding party be allowed backstage before the ceremony. She even asked whether staff could redirect me if I wandered into preparation areas. None of those requests violated venue policy, so Caleb had simply documented them. I didn't think you'd want me refusing reasonable requests, he said. You handled it correctly. You don't seem surprised. I'm disappointed, I answered. Not surprised. The following weekend, Ethan invited me to a wedding planning meeting at the venue. When I arrived, Brianna was already sitting with her parents in one of our private conference rooms. Large layout drawings covered the table. Guest seating, dance floor, floral arrangements, reception schedule. I walked in carrying coffee for everyone. Morning. Victor thanked me politely. Marcia barely looked up. Brianna accepted the coffee without saying thank you. Instead, she pointed toward the seating chart. We've finalized family seating. Looks good, I replied. She slid the chart toward me. I wanted you to see where you'll be sitting. I looked. The head table included Ethan, Brianna, her parents, her maid of honor, the best man, and several close relatives from her side. My assigned seat wasn't even nearby. It was almost against the back wall near several co-workers from Ethan's office. For a second, I honestly thought it had to be a mistake. I looked at Ethan. He avoided my eyes. Brianna thought this arrangement flowed better, he said quietly. I looked back at the chart. So the groom's father isn't sitting with his own son? Brianna answered before Ethan could. We're trying to balance both families. I studied the seating plan. There were 6 empty chairs at the head table. Balance wasn't the issue. Image was. I kept my voice calm. If that's what you've decided, I'll respect it. Brianna smiled. I knew you'd understand. I don't think she realized that respect and agreement are two very different things. After the meeting, Ethan caught up with me in the parking lot. Dad, I turned around. I'm sorry. For what? The seating. I shrugged gently. It's your wedding. He rubbed his forehead. Could you just go along with it? Just for one day? There it was again. The same sentence. The same quiet request. Just go along with it. I looked at my son. He wasn't being cruel. He was trapped between keeping peace and doing what he knew was right. Unfortunately, choosing peace at the expense of the truth usually costs more in the end. I'll be there, I told him. His shoulders relaxed. Thank you. He hugged me before leaving. It felt different than it used to. Not cold, not warm, just uncertain. That evening, Caleb knocked on my office door again. I've got another issue. He handed me a revised billing summary. Something immediately stood out. Several complimentary services had been relabeled as special courtesy provided by the Cole family. I frowned. Who authorized this? No one here. Then how did it happen? The bride requested the wording. I read the page twice. Not only had Brianna removed any indication that the discounts came from the venue, but she had rewritten them to make it appear as though her own family had negotiated every upgrade. Even worse, Ethan had been copied on the revised documents. Whether he noticed the changes or not, I couldn't tell. Caleb watched my reaction carefully. Do you want me to correct it? I was quiet for several moments. Finally, I shook my head. Not yet. You sure? Very. He looked confused. I closed the folder. Sometimes people reveal more about themselves when they believe no one is paying attention. As Caleb left my office, I found myself staring out at the harbor once again. The wedding was still weeks away. Already my place as Ethan's father had been pushed farther and farther into the background. But deep down, I had the uneasy feeling that the seating chart wasn't the real insult. It was only the beginning of something much bigger. The Monday after the seating meeting, I tried to put the whole thing behind me. Business had always been the one place where emotions couldn't be allowed to make decisions. We had 3 corporate events that week, 2 rehearsal dinners and another wedding on Saturday. Hundreds of people depended on Whitaker Harbor events running smoothly, and I had spent 22 years building a reputation for professionalism. Still, every time I walked past the ballroom where Ethan would soon be married, I couldn't stop thinking about that seating chart. Not because of the chair itself, because of what it represented. Someone was slowly rewriting my place in my own son's life. On Wednesday afternoon, Dana Fields called. Raymond, do you have a few minutes? I always have time for you. Good. I'd rather discuss this in person. An hour later, she was sitting across from me in my office with a thick folder resting on the desk. Dana had been my attorney for nearly 15 years. She wasn't dramatic, and she never exaggerated. If something concerned her, I paid attention. She opened the folder. I've been reviewing the Harborline contract for Ethan's wedding, and I noticed several revisions that weren't in the original draft. I leaned forward. What kind of revisions? She slid 2 copies of the agreement across the desk. The original is on the left, the executed version is on the right. At first glance, they looked identical. Then I started reading line by line. Someone had modified payment schedules. Additional services had been added. A clause regarding cancellation fees had been rewritten. Another paragraph shifted responsibility for several optional upgrades onto Ethan instead of the event account. None of those changes had come through my office. Who approved these? I asked. Dana shook her head. That's the problem. There are signatures. Yes. She pointed toward Ethan's electronic signature. Look closely. I compared the timestamps. The amendments had all been signed within 3 minutes. Far too quickly for someone to read 7 pages of revisions. It looks like he signed a bundled document, I said. That's my opinion too. I sat back quietly. Ethan wouldn't intentionally agree to something he hadn't reviewed. I don't think so either. Dana folded her hands. But someone clearly wanted him financially responsible for expenses that were originally covered. I stared at the paperwork. It wasn't enough to prove fraud, but it was enough to raise questions. Don't confront anyone yet, Dana said. We need facts first. I agree. Before she left, she gave me one more piece of advice. Save every email. Already do. Good. Something tells me we're going to need them. She nodded. I think you're right. That same afternoon, Caleb knocked softly before entering. I've been digging through the communication logs. I smiled. I didn't ask you to. I know. He placed another folder on my desk. But I thought you should know. Inside were copies of internal emails between Brianna and our event coordinator. One message stood out immediately. Please make sure Mr. Whitaker isn't given access to any management areas during the wedding. We don't want unnecessary confusion. I looked up. Management areas? Caleb nodded. She specifically asked that staff not let you behind the ballroom. I almost laughed. I designed that ballroom. I know. There were more messages. One requested that only Brianna approve any last-minute venue decisions. Another instructed staff to direct all questions away from me, even if guests approached me first. None of the requests violated our customer policies, but together they painted a very clear picture. She wasn't trying to organize a wedding. She was trying to erase me from it. Caleb hesitated before speaking again. There's something else. What is it? I wasn't sure whether it mattered. It probably does. He handed me a printed visitor log. Victor Cole had visited the venue 3 separate times without Ethan. Each visit lasted less than 30 minutes. None had been scheduled through the wedding coordinator. What was he doing? I asked. I honestly don't know. He didn't meet with you? No. Did anyone? I checked. Caleb opened another page. He mostly walked around the property asking maintenance questions. What kind of maintenance questions? He asked about insurance. I frowned. He also asked whether Harborline leased the property or owned it. That caught my attention immediately. What answer did he get? The standard one. Caleb smiled slightly. I told him ownership information wasn't available to clients. Good. He didn't seem happy. Neither was I. That evening I drove home instead of staying late at the office. The drive along the harbor usually helped clear my mind. Not this time. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat inside my truck for nearly 10 minutes. Something wasn't adding up. Brianna wanted control over every wedding detail. Victor was asking questions about ownership. The contracts had been quietly altered. The invoices had been rewritten. Individually, none of those things proved bad intentions. Together, they formed a pattern. The next morning, I invited Ethan to breakfast. For a little while, it felt like old times. We talked about baseball, his job, Charleston traffic. Then I asked carefully, "Have you looked over the final wedding contracts?" He shrugged. "Brianna handled most of it." "You signed everything?" "Yeah." "Did you read every revision?" He smiled awkwardly. "Honestly, I trusted her." I nodded slowly. That answer hurt more than he realized. Not because he trusted the woman he planned to marry, because he had stopped asking questions. As we stood to leave, I almost told him everything. I almost handed him the contracts. I almost warned him. But Dana's advice echoed in my mind. Facts first, emotion later. So I simply shook his hand, wished him a good day, and watched him walk away. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about losing an argument with my son. I was worried that he was walking straight into something he couldn't yet see. Over the next 2 weeks, I followed Dana's advice. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't argue with Ethan. I didn't even respond when Brianna ignored me during a menu tasting at the venue. Instead, I watched. People who believe they're in control usually become careless. They stop hiding what matters because they assume no one is paying attention. That assumption would become the Coles' biggest mistake. Late one Friday afternoon, Caleb knocked on my office door again. "I've got something you need to see." He closed the door behind him before placing a tablet on my desk. "I wasn't looking for this," he said. "I found it while reviewing the event timeline." On the screen was an email chain between Brianna, Marcia, and the venue coordinator. The coordinator had simply forwarded it to Caleb because she wasn't sure how to answer one of the requests. I read the messages carefully. Most of them were ordinary. Flower delivery times, guest arrival schedules, photography access. Then I reached one message from Marcia. "If Mr. Whitaker starts making things uncomfortable, we'd like security to escort him out immediately. We don't want him making the wedding about himself." I looked up at Caleb. "Did anyone respond?" He nodded. "Our coordinator told them security only removes guests for safety issues or at the direction of the contracting party." Who was listed as the contracting party? Ethan. That mattered. Legally, security couldn't simply remove someone because a family member didn't like them. They would need Ethan's approval. Or so I hoped. I handed the tablet back. "Keep a copy." I already have. The following Monday, Dana called again. I found something interesting. An hour later, I was sitting in her conference room. She slid several public financial records across the table. Victor Coles Construction Company. I looked down. The company had been successful years earlier. Recently, it wasn't. Outstanding tax liens, several lawsuits from unpaid suppliers, a commercial loan that appeared to be in default. None of it was criminal, but it painted a picture of a business under serious financial pressure. Dana folded her hands. Raymond, I'm not saying Victor is planning anything illegal. But people under financial stress sometimes make very bad decisions. I nodded slowly. Does Ethan know? I doubt it. I stared at the paperwork. Victor had always presented himself as a wealthy businessman. Luxury cars, private club memberships, designer suits. Now I wondered how much of it had been financed with money he no longer had. Before I left, Dana showed me one more document, a draft agreement for a future home purchase. Ethan's name was on it. So was Brianna's. One clause caught my attention. If they purchased the home before marriage, ownership percentages could be adjusted based on additional contributions from either party. On its own, that wasn't unusual. Then Dana pointed to handwritten notes in the margin. Use inheritance if available. I frowned. What inheritance? Dana looked at me. Exactly. I didn't have an answer. Neither did she. That evening I called Ethan. Want to have dinner? He hesitated. I can't tonight. Everything okay? Yeah. He paused. Brianna wants to meet with a mortgage advisor. Already? We're just planning ahead. I smiled even though he couldn't see it. Planning is good. It is. Then his voice became quieter. She thinks it's important that married couples combine everything. I didn't criticize him. I simply said, make sure you understand every document before you sign it. There was a long silence. Finally, he answered, I know, Dad. After we hung up, I couldn't stop thinking about how often Ethan used to ask my opinion. Now he sounded like someone asking permission to end a conversation. 2 days later, Caleb came to my office carrying another folder. I think this is the last piece. Inside were security planning notes for the wedding. Most of them were routine, emergency exits, parking instructions, vendor entrances. Then, near the bottom of one page, someone had added a handwritten instruction. If Raymond Whitaker causes a disturbance, remove him immediately before speeches begin. There was no signature, no date, just the instruction. Caleb looked uneasy. I checked with security. And? They said Brianna insisted this note be included. Did Ethan know? They don't think so. I closed the folder carefully. For the first time since all of this began, I felt something deeper than disappointment. It wasn't anger. It was sadness. Someone had spent weeks planning not just a wedding, but my humiliation. I drove home later than usual that evening. The sun had already disappeared below the Charleston harbor. As I unlocked my front door, I noticed an old framed photograph sitting on the hallway table. Laura stood between Ethan and me at a 4th of July picnic. Ethan couldn't have been more than 10. He was grinning with missing front teeth while holding a sparkler. Laura had one hand on my shoulder. I picked up the frame. I wish you were here, I said quietly, because for the first time in years, I felt like I was about to lose our son all over again. The morning of the wedding arrived with clear skies over Charleston Harbor. From my office window, I watched the first vendors unload flowers, chairs, and sound equipment. The waterfront looked exactly the way couples hoped it would on their wedding day. Gentle waves reflected the morning light, and a soft breeze moved through the oak trees lining the ceremony lawn. Normally, a wedding day filled me with quiet satisfaction. That morning, it filled me with uncertainty. I had spent months telling myself that everything I had learned could still amount to misunderstandings. Maybe Brianna was simply controlling because she was stressed. Maybe Victor's financial problems had nothing to do with Ethan. Maybe the emails were rude but harmless. I wanted to believe that. For Ethan's sake, I needed to believe it. Around 9 o'clock, Caleb knocked on my office door. The florist is finished. Catering is on schedule. Security has checked in. He paused before adding, Dana just arrived. I nodded. Has she reviewed everything? She has copies of every email, every invoice revision, every contract version, and the security instructions. Good. He looked at me carefully. Do you still want us to stay completely out of it? Unless someone forces our hand. Caleb gave a short nod. You have my word. Before he left, he asked one last question. Are you okay? I smiled faintly. I'm a father. He understood exactly what I meant. No father is ever truly okay when he watches his child walk toward a mistake he can't prevent. I changed into my black tuxedo in the small office I kept upstairs. It had been years since I wore it myself instead of simply greeting guests in a business suit. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the owner of Whitaker Harbor Events. I saw a widowed father hoping to watch his only son get married. That was all I wanted. Nothing more. Guests began arriving shortly before 4 in the afternoon. The ceremony lawn filled with laughter, conversations, and the familiar excitement that always comes before a wedding. A few longtime Charleston residents recognized me and waved. Beautiful place as always, Raymond. Thank you. Your son picked the perfect venue. I smiled politely. He certainly did. None of them knew how strange those words felt. Officially, I was simply another guest. I took my assigned seat exactly where Brianna had placed me, near the back of the reception ballroom, far from the head table. Several people looked confused. One older couple whispered to each other after checking the seating chart. I'm surprised his father isn't up front. So am I. I pretended not to hear them. Across the room, I caught Ethan looking in my direction. For a brief second, our eyes met. He looked guilty. I gave him a small nod that said everything I wanted him to hear. I'm here. I'm proud of you. Enjoy your day. The ceremony itself was beautiful. The minister spoke about commitment, honesty, and trust. Those words stayed with me longer than the vows. Because while Ethan repeated them sincerely, I couldn't help wondering how much honesty still existed beneath everything that had happened over the past 3 months. After the ceremony, guests moved inside for the reception. The ballroom looked stunning. Crystal chandeliers reflected against the harbor windows. The floral arrangements were exactly what Brianna had wanted. The band played softly while servers carried trays of appetizers through the crowd. Everything appeared perfect. Appearances can be remarkably convincing. Dinner passed without incident. I congratulated the newlyweds. Brianna accepted my congratulations with a practiced smile. Thank you for coming. Not thank you for everything. Not even thank you, Raymond. Just thank you for coming. As though I had been invited out of courtesy. The speeches began shortly afterward. The best man spoke first. Then the maid of honor. People laughed. They cried. They raised glasses. Finally, Brianna stood. She accepted the microphone with complete confidence. I want to thank everyone who helped make today possible. She smiled toward her parents. My mom and dad have always shown me what success looks like. Applause filled the room. She continued. They taught me that family means surrounding yourself with people who lift you up instead of holding you back. Several guests nodded. Then she turned toward Ethan. My husband worked incredibly hard to build the life we have today. Again, applause. He achieved everything through his own determination. I felt my stomach tighten. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Some people like to take credit for another person's success. She slowly turned toward me. But Ethan became the man he is despite the burdens placed on him, not because of them. The ballroom became noticeably quieter. People began looking from Brianna to me. She wasn't finished. I think it's important that today belongs only to the people who truly supported us. She looked toward 2 security officers standing near the ballroom entrance. Then she spoke clearly enough for nearly everyone to hear. Would you please escort Mr. Whitaker out before he ruins this reception? For a second, nobody moved. The band stopped playing. Conversations disappeared. The 2 officers looked uncertain. One glanced toward Ethan. My son stood frozen beside his bride. He didn't speak. He didn't object. He didn't defend me. He simply stood there in complete silence. The officers began walking toward my table. I slowly stood up. Not because I intended to leave, but because I knew the next few minutes would change every life in that ballroom. I stood quietly as the 2 security officers stopped a few feet in front of me. Neither of them looked comfortable. The older officer cleared his throat. Sir, we've been asked to escort you outside. His voice was respectful, almost apologetic. I nodded. I understand. Across the ballroom, Brianna folded her arms as if the matter had already been settled. Marcia stood beside her with a satisfied expression. Victor remained silent, watching everything carefully. The guests had stopped eating. Nearly 200 people were now looking in my direction. I turned toward Ethan. Son. His eyes finally met mine. Do you want me removed? He looked at Brianna, then back at me. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. That silence hurt more than anything Brianna had ever said. Before either security officer could speak again, another voice echoed across the ballroom. Please don't touch him. Everyone turned. Caleb Morris was walking calmly toward us. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't angry. He simply carried a leather portfolio in one hand. When he reached the officers, he smiled politely. Gentlemen, I need you to hold off for just a moment. One of them frowned. We're following the bride's instructions. Caleb nodded. I understand. Then he looked directly at Brianna. Unfortunately, those instructions can't override the rights of the property's legal owner. The room became completely silent. Brianna frowned. What are you talking about? Caleb turned toward me. Mr. Whitaker. He smiled warmly. Would you like to explain, or should I? I shook my head. You can. Caleb faced the guests. My name is Caleb Morris. I'm the general manager of Whitaker Harbor Events. He paused long enough for every eye in the room to settle on him. The venue you're standing in is owned by Whitaker Harbor Holdings, LLC. He looked toward me. The sole owner of that company is Raymond Whitaker. For several seconds, nobody said a word. Then whispers spread through the ballroom. What? He's the owner? I thought he was just the groom's father. Brianna stared at me in disbelief. No, she laughed nervously. That's impossible. Caleb calmly opened the portfolio. Inside was a certified copy of the business ownership documents. The property deed. He laid it on a nearby table. The LLC registration. Then another document. And the management agreement showing Harborline Group operates the venue on behalf of Mr. Whitaker. Brianna's face lost its color. She looked at Ethan. You knew? Ethan looked equally stunned. I knew Dad owned the company. His voice cracked. I didn't know Harborline was his. She took a step backward. Victor suddenly spoke. This isn't relevant. Before anyone could respond, Dana Field stood from one of the guest tables. She had attended quietly all evening, exactly as we planned. Carrying a slim folder, she walked toward the center of the ballroom. I'm Dana Fields, she said calmly. I'm Mr. Whitaker's attorney. She placed several documents beside Caleb's. I believe these are relevant. She looked toward Ethan. Mr. Whitaker, before you signed your final wedding contract, several financial clauses were changed. Ethan frowned. What? Dana handed him both versions. The original agreement, then the revised one. You'll notice additional charges shifted into your personal responsibility. Ethan compared the pages. His expression changed almost immediately. I never approved this. Dana nodded. We don't believe you knowingly did. She then turned toward the guests. The electronic signatures were completed within 3 minutes. She looked back at Ethan. We believe multiple revisions were bundled together. Brianna immediately interrupted. That's ridiculous. Dana remained perfectly calm. Perhaps. She opened another folder. But there's more. She displayed printed email chains, one after another. Request to isolate me from venue operations. Instructions limiting my access. The rewritten invoices claiming the Cole family had arranged complimentary upgrades. Finally, the email from Marcia. If Mr. Whitaker starts making things uncomfortable, we'd like security to escort him out immediately. The room grew even quieter. Marcia's face turned bright red. Victor stepped forward. Those emails are private. They became evidence, Dana answered evenly, when they were used to support business decisions. Brianna looked desperately toward Ethan. I was just trying to protect our wedding. Ethan wasn't looking at her anymore. He was reading invoice after invoice. Then he looked up. These discounts... He turned toward me. Dad. I said nothing. He continued reading. The upgraded lighting. Another page. The waterfront cocktail reception. Another. The extended rental hours. His voice became quieter. You paid for all of this? I smiled gently. I wanted you to start your marriage without unnecessary debt. He looked like someone had taken the ground out from under him. I thought, I know what you thought. His eyes filled with tears. Before he could say anything else, Officer Grant Ellis stepped forward from the ballroom entrance. One of the security officers had quietly called the local police once the confrontation began. Officer Ellis looked around the room. I'm going to ask everyone to remain calm. His tone was professional. No one is under arrest. He looked toward Dana. Counselor? Dana handed him copies of the altered contracts and emails. We believe there may be civil issues involving contract revisions and possible signature misuse. Officer Ellis nodded. We'll document everything. There were no raised voices, no dramatic arrests, only facts. Exactly as I wanted. Then Ethan slowly turned toward Brianna. His voice was almost a whisper. Did you know about all of this? She didn't answer. That silence finally gave him the answer he needed. The ballroom stayed quiet long after Ethan asked his question. Did you know about all of this? Brianna looked from Ethan to her parents, hoping one of them would answer first. Neither of them did. Victor lowered his eyes. Marcia folded her arms but said nothing. That silence was louder than any confession. Officer Grant Ellis asked everyone directly involved to remain inside while the other guests were escorted to the outdoor patio. The band quietly packed away their instruments. Conversations turned into whispers as people tried to understand what had just happened. No one celebrated. No one shouted. It felt less like the end of a wedding and more like the end of an illusion. Officer Ellis spoke calmly. We're documenting what happened today. If there are questions involving contracts or financial documents, those will be handled through the proper legal process. Dana handed him organized copies of every document. The originals remain secured, she said. These are duplicates for the report. He thanked her and continued taking statements. Caleb explained the ownership structure of the venue, the management agreement, and the requests made by Brianna and Marcia before the wedding. The security officers confirmed that they had received instructions to remove me only if directed by the contracting party or if there was a safety issue. Neither condition had existed. When Officer Ellis finished speaking with everyone, he reminded the group that any civil disputes would be resolved through attorneys in the courts. It was exactly how it should have been. No drama, just facts. Ethan stood alone near the dance floor, still holding the two versions of the wedding contract. He slowly walked toward Brianna. When were you going to tell me? She wiped tears from her face. I was trying to make everything perfect. Perfect? His voice remained calm, but the disappointment in it filled the room. You told everyone I built my life without my father. She looked away. You let me believe your parents paid for the upgrades. Another silence. You knew he paid for them. Brianna finally spoke. I thought it would be better if we started our marriage without him controlling everything. I took a slow breath. I never wanted control. Everyone looked toward me. I only wanted my son to have a beautiful wedding. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. I know that now. Dana quietly approached him. There's one more matter you should understand. She placed a single document in front of him. The marriage license. Ethan frowned. It hasn't been filed with the county yet. She nodded. The ceremony took place, but the paperwork is still pending. Filing it is the final legal step. He stared at the document for several long seconds. Then he carefully set it back on the table. I'm not signing anything else today. Brianna looked shocked. Ethan. He gently shook his head. I need the truth before I make the biggest decision of my life. No one argued with him. Over the next several days, Dana filed a civil action concerning the altered contract terms and the unauthorized billing revisions. The venue recovered the unpaid costs through the legal process, and every disputed charge was documented properly. There were no dramatic courtroom speeches, no unbelievable punishments, just accountability. Exactly the way justice usually works. 2 weeks later, I was closing the venue after another wedding when I saw Ethan standing outside my office. He looked exhausted, older than he had only a month before. I opened the door. "You don't have to stand outside." He walked in quietly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked at me. "I'm sorry." Those 2 words carried more weight than 100 excuses ever could. I should have listened. I didn't answer immediately. He continued. "You warned me without trying to control me." He looked around my office. I was so worried about keeping everyone else happy that I stopped seeing the person who had never stopped protecting me. I nodded slowly. "I wasn't asking you to choose between me and Brianna." "I know. I only wanted you to ask questions before trusting anyone with your future." A tear rolled down his cheek. "I failed you." I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, you made a mistake. Those aren't the same thing." He looked at me with the same expression he had worn as a little boy after scraping his knees. "Can you forgive me?" I smiled gently. "I already have." He let out a long breath. "But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened." "I understand. Our relationship will take time." He nodded. "I'll earn it." "I believe you will." After he left, I walked through the empty ballroom. The chairs had already been stacked, the lights were dim. Outside, the Charleston harbor reflected the last colors of the evening sky. I stood by the windows where hundreds of couples had celebrated new beginnings over the years. Revenge had never been what I wanted. Respect was. In the end, I didn't win because I owned the venue. I won because I never abandoned my character when everyone else abandoned theirs. Sometimes dignity speaks more loudly than anger ever could. And sometimes the quietest kind of justice lasts the longest. If this story reminds us of anything, it's that real strength isn't about raising your voice or getting even. It's about holding on to your integrity when the people you love give you every reason to lose it. Respect can be taken for granted, but character always reveals itself in the end. I'd love to hear what you think. If you were in Raymond's place, would you have stayed as calm as he did, or would you have walked away the moment the humiliation began? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read as many of them as I can. If this story moved you, please leave a like. It really helps more people discover these stories. And if you enjoy emotional family revenge and family drama stories with realistic endings, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Until next time, never let someone else's choices change who you are.